So when I was in first grade, just like that, a boy in my class kissed me during gym class. I know, scandal. But the real scandal was that I got punished and sent out to the hallway. And I was telling this story at dinner with friends recently, and I paused and I said, I guess that was really the beginning of my feminist awakening. And it wasn't until many years later, encountering Torah, that I confronted another moment, a different sort of exclusion that called out with the same injustice as being punished for Joey's first grade choices. Sorry, Joey, not you. Tomorrow morning, as I said, when we open the Torah, we'll prepare once again to stand at Sinai, to experience revelation and receive Torah. And as with all big and covenantal moments in our lives, whether it's marriage, birth, b'nai mitzvah, the first grade Shabbat, we need to prepare ourselves. We can't just show up. And the Torah gives really clear instructions for those preparations. Go to the people, God tells Moses, and tell them to get ready. Make sure, Moses, that they stay pure, and today and tomorrow, and make sure they wash their clothes. Keep them safe, Moses. Don't let them go up to the mountain or even touch its border. Sure, Moses nods, and then heads down the mountain to give these warnings to the people. In fact, it says, Vayered Moshe minaha el ha'am, vayikadesh et ha'am. Moses came down from the mountain to the people and warned the people to stay pure, and they washed their clothes. But then one verse later, just one line later, the moment that stopped me in my tracks when I first encountered it and continues to make me stumble year after year, anytime I read it or teach it. Vayomer el ha'am, heyu nechonim, l'shloshet yamim, Al tigshu el isha. And he said to the people, be ready for the third day. The men among you should not go near a woman. Judith Plaskow is one of the world's foremost feminist theologians and the author of Standing Again at Sinai, a book that changed my life and my understanding of our text and tradition. And in its introduction, she writes, there's perhaps no verse in the Torah more disturbing to the feminists than Moses' warning to the people in Exodus 19:15. Be ready for the third day, do not go near a woman. She writes, for here, at the very moment that the Jewish people stand at Mount Sinai ready to enter into the covenant, not the covenant with the individual patriarchs, but presumably with the people as a whole, Moses seems to address the community only as men. And she continues, noting that Moses does not say, like he could, men and women don't go near each other. Instead, she writes, at the central moment of Jewish history, women are invisible. It is not their experience that interested the chronicler or informed and shaped the text. Reading her book in college, I understood this fundamental question as, how can I access this text, this tradition, this community, if I was excluded at its most foundational moment? And as you might have guessed, I have largely dedicated my life to answering that question. But this is not only a feminist question, and it's not only a question for the momentous occasion of Sinai. So this is not a thought exercise. I want you to actually do it. Raise your hand if you've ever felt like an outsider, left out, left behind. Okay. And raise your hand if you have kids, if your child has ever come home and told you that they were excluded or made fun of by a classmate or a friend. And what happens, do you think, when that happens over and over again? February is, in case you didn't know, Jewish Disability Awareness and Inclusion Month. It's also Black History Month. Julia Watts-Belzer is a rabbi, an academic, and a spiritual teacher who works at the intersections of disability studies, feminist Jewish ethics, and environmental justice, which seems like a lot put all together. And she tells the story of a colleague who, upon looking at facts from recent climate disasters, looking at stories of New Yorkers trapped in high-rise apartment buildings, mostly low-income New Yorkers, for days after Hurricane Sandy, or elderly nursing home residents in Florida who died from extreme heat when the institutions didn't evacuate before Hurricane Irma, or disaster warnings that over the years have been inaccessible to deaf communities. She said her colleague threw up his hands. And she writes that he said, "It's terrible," he told me, "but what can you do? Some people just aren't going to make it." And she writes, "Once I got over my outrage, I realized that my colleague had unwittingly named a core problem facing those of us organizing for justice, the assumption that some folks simply aren't cut out to survive." So all of us who raised our hands earlier, all of us who have at some point in our life felt vulnerable or outside, let that be our own canary in the coal mine. Let that remind us and inspire us to heed what is Belzer's call to action that she takes from disability justice advocates, "No body is disposable," or what she takes from our tradition, that all bodies are divine. The most repeated commandment in Torah is one that actually does not appear in the 10 Commandments that we chant tomorrow. We rabbis, collectively, here and elsewhere, love to remind you that love the stranger and remember the stranger are repeated 36 times in the Torah, more than the command to love God, more than the command to love or honor your parents, We are asked to see the person we might be tempted to ignore, the one who does not belong to us, maybe the person who does not fit in. And not only the stranger, in fact. We are commanded time and again to protect the orphan and the widow. We are called to give voice to those whose own might have been ignored or overlooked. We are called to share power with those who might have less or have none. But almost more important than the call is the why. Why are we asked to do this? And it says over and over, "Ki gerim hayitam," because we were strangers in the land of Egypt, because we know the heart of the stranger, because that was us once before, and we know it could be us at any moment. The enduring understanding of the Exodus is meant to be empathy, and the ideology of the Exodus is meant to be inclusion, and the result of that revelation at Sinai should be responsibility. Now, many of you, if you kids have been Klei Kodesh, have heard me tell stories on Friday mornings, whether in AMC or this year in our kinder and first grade services. And you may have noticed, because it is not accidental, that I often return to these lessons, empathy and inclusion and responsibility. I often remind our young friends that it is their job, along with growing and learning, but maybe their most important job, to notice which friends might be sitting alone, or which friend might seem sad, or it is their job to notice who doesn't get invited to birthday parties, or who gets teased about the way that they look or what they like to play or dress. And for us grown-ups, I actually think we're supposed to notice the same. Because it starts early, both the exclusion and the empathy. Because all bodies are divine, and no body is disposable. Because we know the heart of the stranger, because we have been the stranger. Shabbat Shalom.